and gentlemen, here's our very own senior, Mr. Roy Wulf.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Roy Wulf, and this is my directed independent study presentation about the European Fifes and Drums of the American Revolution. So I think it's good to start off with some historical background. This July 4th, 2026, it will mark 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. However, in 1776, the American Revolution was far from over. At the end of that year, Washington's army was actually driven out of New York in a series of terrible defeats. In September 1777, following the retreat of the Continental Army at the Battle of Brandywine, the de facto American capital of Philadelphia was actually captured by the British, and the Continental Congress was forced to flee. The Americans had declared independence, but how did America actually win its independence as a new nation? So there is a myth about this. The myth is that these plucky backcountry woodsmen and farmers all pulled together and they managed to somehow vanquish the British, who were one of the most powerful military forces in the world at that time. The Americans, it said, cleverly used the tactics that they learned from the Native Americans, like hiding behind trees and rocks, while the British foolishly fought out in open mass formations, wearing these bright red coats to make themselves easy targets. But the reality is that most battles between the British and Continental forces during the Revolutionary War actually ended in defeat for the Americans and victory for the well-disciplined redcoats. The Americans, they simply lacked the supplies, the equipment, the discipline to actually stand up to these well-trained soldiers. And time and again, they were badly beaten. For much of the war, General Washington and the other American commanders did an excellent job of somehow keeping the Continental Army together and from being utterly annihilated. Yet, if it were not for timely and urgently needed help, it is very difficult to imagine how the United States might have realistically prevailed. So this help, it came from two European nations friendly to America, or it's perhaps more fitting to say hostile to Great Britain. And these were the two most prominent Catholic nations of Europe, the monarchies, the kingdoms of France and Spain. So France and Spain, they sent weapons, supplies, ships, uniforms, and eventually soldiers and sailors. Famous French commanders included the General Marquis de Lafayette, the General the Comte de Rochambeau, Admiral Le Comte de Grasse. The Spanish troops in the south, in the southern campaign, were commanded by General Don Bernardo de Galvez, after whom Galveston, Texas is actually named. So 1781 was a really important year. In May, General Galvez's Spanish army, they captured Pensacola in Florida. That was a major blow to the British. And then after that, the citizens of Spanish Cuba actually donated money to pay the soldiers of Washington's army. Then Rochambeau convinced Washington to abandon New York City and instead moved to confront British General Lord Cornwallis' army that was at Yorktown, Virginia. And in September, great news came for Washington and Rochambeau because Admiral de Grasse had won a great victory at the Battle of the Virginia Capes, an amazing naval victory for the French that cut off Cornwallis' escape by sea. And then during the summer, the French and American armies came down to Yorktown. They put Cornwallis under siege by land. And it's very lucky that the French during that time were known as the masters of siege warfare. They wrote all the textbooks about siege warfare, and Rochambeau was a very experienced commander. The siege lasted for many weeks. On October 14th, 400 French soldiers and 400 American soldiers, they successfully stormed the British redoubts 9 and 10, and that put the Allied lines within 400 yards of the British lines. The attack on Redoubt 9, the French attack, was led by Le Comte de Viomenil, with the assault column was led by Wilhelm von Zweibrücken and his German soldiers that were actually serving as auxiliaries in the French army. The American attack on Redoubt 10 was, of course, led by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton, who was part of the Marquis de Lafayette's Light Infantry Division. And that was, of course, before Colonel Hamilton starred in his own musical. On October 19th, finally the British Army surrendered. It was a massive defeat for the British. It's interesting, the surrender was announced by a single British drummer who came up on the parapet and sounded the parley. And the defeat at Yorktown really paved the way for the Treaty of Paris to be signed in 1783, marking the official American victory. Officially, America had won its independence. And it's been said, one of the most important things that Washington did during this entire campaign was to follow the advice of his very experienced subordinate, the French General Rochambeau. So now, to honor the often overlooked but critical contribution that both France and Spain made in making the United States of America a reality, St. Paul VI Catholic High School, we've been proud to field our own fife and drum corps inspired by this European alliance with America in the Revolutionary War. And as far as we know, nothing like our corps exists anywhere else in the United States. Now, to start this musical unit at PVI, it was necessary to try to recreate a European fife and drum corps from the 18th century. And in this presentation, I'll discuss how this was achieved, and we'll be discussing both the look and the sound of the corps. But before I get into the presentation, I'd like you all to watch a short video highlighting some of our performances this year. We've had over 20 performances from our start in fall 2024 until today. I hope you enjoy. can see, the PVI Corps is already somewhat famous. So the Corps was featured twice in 2025 in the Arlington Catholic Herald. We actually won 2 unit awards with the American Friends of Lafayette at the Alexandria George Washington Birthday Parade back in February. We received a certificate for participation at the big VIP event, the America 250 Kickoff in Leesburg. We received generous donations from the Daughters of the American Revolution and because of our Veterans Day performance from the Centerville Eye Care Center. So when we consider a fife and drum corps, the first thing we might think of is the music. However, I would argue that the look, not the sound, is perhaps the most important part to evoke the sense that these musicians are portraying people from our past. Because of this, we paid careful attention to our uniforms, our flag, and our banner. So we decided upon a uniform that's similar to the one worn by the Régiment Bourbonnais of the French Army at Yorktown. And it was selected not only to represent this unit, but actually as a way to represent all of America's European allies, France and Spain. Also, this regiment was selected because it was present with Rochambeau at the pivotal Battle of Yorktown, and because the colors of this regiment's uniform, they closely match PVI school colors. Arguably, the most important part, I would say, of any historical impression is the hat, because it's really what people see first. They look at the hats. You know, the French hats in the American Revolution were quite unique, but Matthew Brankel, he's up in New England, he's provided PVI with perfect hats. They look exactly like they did in 1781, and someone actually saw this picture up on Facebook, and they correctly posted the black and white cockades there. They represent the Franco-American Alliance. Yes, that's correct. We wear our hair naturally, but those with long hair, or crazy enough to wear a period-style wig, can sport a ponytail called a queue. Apart from the hat, the uniform coat is the other most distinctive component. So we've located a very cost-effective reproduction coat. It's very similar to the authentic Bourbonnais coat. What you can see here is the only surviving French coat from the American Revolution. It's an officer's coat and has the best claim of any to have been worn at the Siege of Yorktown. It's from the Régiment de Touraine, and the facing colors, as you can see, the accent colors there, are different. They're a hot pink there. The French really like kind of extravagant colors. So that coat is actually preserved at the museum at Fort Ticonderoga. Underneath the coat, the soldiers of the 18th century would wear what were called small clothes. They consist of the vest, it was called a waistcoat, and then breeches. And the PVI Corps is very grateful to Mrs. Heidi Settle and her mother for sewing vests, and the fabric color and gold buttons we use are very close to what soldiers wore historically. Now, matching breeches, the pants could also be made for the Corps, like those that are pictured here, but we decided upon a more cost-effective option. Corps members wear white baseball or softball pants from a sporting goods store. With its uniforms, the PVI Corps is aiming at mid-level authenticity. We can't achieve the exacting levels of authenticity that serious reenactors pursue, because reenactors are trying to duplicate these uniforms exactly. But our mission, we're a high school musical unit representing PVI, we're not a reenacting unit. So we want to look our best. We'll also make some compromises for the sake of getting our musicians into uniform for some reasonable expense. Gaiters were also part of the French uniform. These are tall woolen spats. They go up over the leg, over the knee, and there are 13 buttons on the outside of the leg. The French army wore both white and black gaiters. They're kind of to keep the rocks and things out of your shoes. They're also decorative, but on a long 20-mile march, you don't want a bunch of rocks in your shoes, and also to keep the dust off of your socks. And we chose to use the black ones because they bring in the school color and because they're just easier to keep clean. So the Corps members simply wear black dress shoes instead of the more historically accurate buckled shoes, which are also fairly uncomfortable. but the gaiters actually cover the shoes, which is very nice. It's labor intensive, but we replaced the white buttons on the gaiters with gold buttons to again bring in that PVI school color of gold. Underheel straps are added to prevent the gaiters from twisting on the leg, and then lastly the gaiters are secured with black leather garters. There are some additional uniform accessories that can be considered. To carry water, gourd canteens were used in the 1780s. In French, the expression for a water bottle, even today, is actually une gourde. So here we have une gourde, and today we have une gourde. That was very gourd. Another possible uniform accessory is that the leader of the corps can wear what's called a gorget. In French they call them the hausse-col. It's a small metal plate. It's actually a holdover from suits of armor. And we could also use other rank insignia. You can see a sergeant stripe there that would kind of go there. So we can consider things like that. There would be other uniform options. One or more of our musicians could be outfitted as a sailor, because indeed the French Navy certainly played a big role at the Battle of the Virginia Capes and led to America's victory. In addition, somebody could be outfitted in a Spanish uniform as a nod to the role played by the Spanish. It's also appropriate that the PVI Corps would carry with pride a regimental flag. Since our Corps is based most closely on the Regiment Bourbonnais, the flag of this regiment was the first and foremost flag that we created for the PVI Corps. My family made it to the exact historical dimensions of the flag. Potentially, the PVI Corps could also carry an American flag and a Spanish flag, and this would also be helpful if the Corps were going to move from just having a single flag bearer to actually developing a full color guard component along with a special corps member to serve as the drum major. The PVI Corps can really act as like the public relations arm of PVI, promoting the school to the public. So the Corps often prominently displays a banner, as you see over there, and that displays our school affiliation. This beautiful banner was hand-painted by the talented PVI artist Milena Peruka-Savulka, and then the wooden banner carrier was made in conformity with historical banner carriers, was created. An attractive pull finial there at the top was actually 3D printed by one of our Corps members, Keegan Settle-Barron. The banner doesn't actually mention the Corps specifically, so this banner could be used really by any group at PVI to promote the school. Of course, as a musical unit, the PVI Corps does make sounds. What's really amazing is that when period-accurate arrangements of 18th century music are performed on close reproductions of the musical instruments at that time, it's really possible to travel in time in the sense of sound. It's possible to hear sounds just as what they would have been heard 250 years ago. And these sounds involve issuing French commands, playing reproduction instruments, and then performing the musical repertoire of the PVI Corps. So here are just some commands in French with a phonetic guide for each. For example, to call the corps to attention, we can say, "Garde à vous!" And then to communicate a forward march, we would say, "En avant, marche!" Again, to use a little bit of the French language just brings another bit of authenticity in that sense of sound. To interpret 18th century music faithfully, the instrumentation of the PVI Corps really must replicate instruments used by military musical ensembles of the period. But keep in mind that in the 18th century, the primary job of the field musicians was not to perform music for entertainment, but rather to convey commands in camp or on a noisy battlefield. Because in the days before public address systems, wireless communication, and electronic amplification, the field musicians would sound the military signals using fifes, drums, and bugles. So first of all, we have the military drum called the tambour in French. It consists of a wooden or brass body. It's shell body made with wooden hoops at both ends. Over that are stretched actually calfskin drum heads, as you can see. The tension on this head is maintained by the system of ropes. It's actually just a very long rope, about 40 feet in length, and these leather ears are used to keep the tension on the head. It's a snare drum, and so that distinctive rattly sound is made by these down here. They're made of gut there. It's a sheep intestine. That's what they're made of, and they're that gives it its rattly sound. The drum was so low that it could be heard. It's very loud and low, so it could be heard on a noisy battlefield. And so I'll demonstrate the drum beating of one of the French calls. This is called au champ, to the field. You know, what's really cool about that call, au champ, is that I actually found a historical account that it was this drum beating that was played when a regiment would march into church for the liturgical blessing of their regimental flags at a special mass. And one reason that having this kind of musical unit at a Catholic school is so appropriate is that the French army before the French Revolution was indeed a thoroughly Catholic organization. There's even instructions in the drill book for what the soldiers should do when the Blessed Sacrament comes by the regiment. The manuals were written to instruct the drummers to play various calls. The melodic lines for the fife were often added, but they seem almost as an afterthought. And some calls in the Instructions pour des tambours et diverses batteries de l'ordonnance 1756 only provide drum beatings without any melodic accompaniment. The Fayette corps, as you can see, purchased two large brass rope tension drums. We often play one as a snare drum and the other one as a bass drum. In the 18th century, bass drums had yet to be introduced into the military, but playing one of our drums like a bass drum actually has worked quite well. We hope to buy two smaller brass drums as well, and we are very pleased with these brass-tipped drumsticks. They're very, very fancy, and the white leather sling that's provided with each drum. So now to pass to the fife. By 1776, the fife, it was a staple of European martial music. On the battlefields, this piercing sound of the fife, it would soar above the lower frequency sounds of the war soundscape, and it originated in medieval Switzerland, actually. It's a simple transverse wooden instrument. It includes 6 finger holes. And wooden fifes, they also have these metal ferrules at both ends that protects the wood from splitting, especially when you're on the march or camping. The English word fife, that comes from the German word pfeife, and that means just pipe. But in French, the fife is known as the fife. It's an instrument that comes from a time before standardized tuning, so the pitch of different kinds of fife varies greatly. It's just a hollowed out piece of wood here. This fife, the fife in the key of D, was the historic French tuning. B flat is the modern American tuning. When you play a D on this, that sounds like a B flat in concert pitch or on a piano. Finally, the British and Americans, they use the key of C for their fifes. The PVI corps we decided to use this one, the one in the tuning of B flat, in order to be in tune with other fife and drum corps. We standardized around the Ferrari B flat fife. It's in Mopane wood, and it's made by Peeler fifes. For those learning to play, we use an inexpensive but very reliable plastic fife that's made by Cooperman. It actually has a quite good sound overall, though it's a little bit out of tune with the wooden B-flat fifes. But as a solution, one of our PVI Corps members, Keegan Settlebaron, actually ingeniously 3D printed a fife, and it has a join at the center, so you can actually tune it, which is really helpful. They play so well, they really should be sold commercially, Keegan. So as I said, the drums, they can be heard below the sound of battle, the fifes above it. As for the bugles, they were just loud enough and directional enough that they could be heard through all the commotion. Fifes and drums, they were more common in the 18th century, but the bugles were being used more and more, especially by the cavalry and the dismounted cavalry and by the light infantry. The light infantry was called the chasseurs à pied in French. It's possible to ride a horse and play a bugle with one hand, but you need two hands to play either a fife or a drum. Though there were sometimes the cavalry units actually put drums on both sides of the horse and they played it like that. It's crazy. So Yuri Villanueva, he's an excellent bugler, writing over at the Taft Bugler website. He describes an interesting incident that involved bugles during the American Revolution. Quote, early in the morning of September 15, 1776, 5 British warships with 4,000 troops moved into position at Kips Bay, New York. The British halted at the base of Harlem Heights Plateau and sounded their bugle horn as if signaling the end of a fox chase. Joseph Reed, Washington's adjutant, wrote to his wife explaining how he felt upon hearing the enemy bugles. As he wrote to action, quote, the enemy appeared in open view and in the most insulting manner sounded their bugle horn as is usual after a fox chase. I never felt such a sensation before. It seemed to crown our disgrace. Villanueva continues, quote, Reed seems to infer that these horns were not used only to signal troops, but also as a means of psychological warfare against the enemy. In this picture, it can be seen that one kind of bugle used by the armies was the small post horn bugle, and this is actually the same kind of horn that was used in European countries as it's still today used as a symbol of the postal service, because when a postal rider on horseback or in a wagon, he would sound the post horn to let everybody know that the mail had arrived. And that's why it's called the post horn. Fortunately, bugles of this type are still being manufactured today in all sorts of sizes. There are whole choirs that they make of them. And they can be found mostly in Germany. So there were actually 2 categories of military music during the 18th century. We've been describing the field music so far, and that was the drums, fifes, or sometimes oboes, and then gradually bugles. In addition to this, there were the bands of music, and yeah, they often spelled it with a K there. These were professional musicians that the officers would hire to perform music for parades, or meals, special events, or dances. The instruments were often oboes, clarinets, French horns, bassoons, and additional percussion. So to represent these percussion instruments, we've selected the Turkish crescent. It's a traditional instrument consisting of a large decorated staff here, often made out of brass, and on these various platforms sit rows of jangling bells. And the instrument can be played by shaking it, twisting it, or just beating it on the ground. And in French, this instrument is called the chapeau chinois, or the Chinese hat, because of the circular platform at the top. The Turkish crescent, as the name would suggest, it originated in the Ottoman Empire with the Janissary bands. And during this time, the Europeans had a fascination with this mysterious enemy superpower to the east. The Turks had actually attacked Vienna, Austria, twice in 1529 and then later in 1683. Both times they were beaten back. When European armies would then capture this strange and exotic instrument, they would actually incorporate it into music to make it sound excitingly foreign or exotic. And for example, the composer, one of the most famous composers of the French Baroque, Jean-Baptiste Lully, actually incorporates a Turkish crescent into his incidental music for the play Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme by Molière in the March for the Turkish Ceremony. They were clearly in use by the armies at the time of Napoleon, but it's at least possible that Rochambeau's army might have had one. And we include this as an auxiliary percussion instrument. These instruments are actually still found in European military bands today. For example, the elite French Foreign Legion carries one at the head of the column. This Turkish crescent was actually built from scratch by my family. No two historical examples of the Turkish crescent are actually the same, so it's possible just to assemble, candlesticks, candelabras, platters, lamps, and so forth in a semi-random fashion, and then to hang a variety of bells on the structure. These two long horsehair tassels, they hang from both ends of the crescent here to decorate. I should mention that our Turkish crescent player, Patrick Settlebaron, is actually graduating this year, so we will need someone to carry around this huge tambourine-like instrument and explain to everyone who asks about it what it is. So rising sophomores, juniors, and seniors, please apply. Another instrument in the bands of music was the serpent, and this provided accompaniment in the bass line. It's kind of like what the tuba does today. It was invented by a Catholic priest, actually, in 1590, Edmé Guillaume, to accompany Gregorian chant, kind of to bolster that bass line. It has a very vocal quality. And eventually, it was incorporated into the military bands by the musicians during the 18th century. And so we can play the serpent in the PVI course. I'll get the serpent out of its serpent enclosure and bring it out. As for the musical repertoire, we can actually include all of the following: historical military signals of the 1780s French Army, 18th century French popular music, French military marches, fife and drums, standard jam tunes, and then traditional Christmas carols from Catholic Europe. So to start with military signals, these were the prescribed set of drum beats, fife signals, and bugle calls that all corresponded to specific commands that would be instantly recognizable by the soldiers. Historic drumming writes, prior to 1754, it appears that different regiments and branches had their own drum beatings for different duty calls. But during the reforms in the army in 1754, there was an effort to standardize the entire army, including these duty calls. And actually, what's interesting, this is actually from the drill book, and this explains the role of the field music. And this says, as it's not possible that the voice of the major officers suffices, that they would be heard in front of many battalions, we are obliged to use drums which announce each movement. Because of these reforms, the Instruction pour les tambours et diverses batteries de l'ordonnance 1756, that was the official collection of all these military duty calls, arranged for drums. They were played with either fifes or oboes, called hautbois in French. And a scan of this original document is available on the French website Gallica. As for the bugles, they were first adopted by the cavalry, but then they were gradually taken up by the infantry and artillery. Not only does the Instruction here provide sheet music for the 12 duty calls, it was also the primary instruction manual for the army drummers, containing musical staff depictions as well as description and onomatopoeic cues for each instrument. And in addition to this valuable document, there's also the Instruction sur l'exercice de l'infanterie de 29 juin 1753, which was the infantry rule book, and that's another valuable resource to recreate the French army. So here are the 12 duty calls, and from these calls, the PVI Corps performs le drapeau, which is the equivalent of to the colors. It's a regimental salute to the regimental flag. So now I will have the PVI Corps join me on stage to demonstrate some music. Excusez-moi. Musique!
À vos rangs! Musique, garde à vous. En avant, marche. Musique, garde à vous. Le drapeau. Musique, à vos instruments. Repos.
Another source of music for the court to perform is French folk music. These are melodies from classical music, the French Baroque, and popular songs. And when such chansons populaires are played for French people, the reaction is always enthusiastic. These songs have been sung by the French soldiers in America, bolstering their morale on these long marches and bringing back memories of home. A list of tunes was actually graciously provided to us by Madame Myriam Roiset, and she's the president of the Lafayette Club at the Château Chavignac in Auvergne, France, which was the birthplace of the Marquis de Lafayette. One popular song that we perform is Auprès de ma blonde, next to my girlfriend. It's perhaps the French Army's equivalent of Yankee Doodle. And Monsieur Jérôme Orlandi of the Fife and Drums de Fréjus was kind enough to share his arrangement with the corps. So here is Auprès de ma blonde.
Musique, garde à vous. Auprès de ma blonde.
Another interesting tune that's very similar to this is Trois jeunes tambours, three young drummers. Unfortunately, we only have 2 drums at the moment, so we'll let you know. Please donate to our fife and drum corps. We'll get that 3rd drum. However, one folk song that we can perform is C'est l'Aviron, it's rowing. And the history of this tune is cool. As France established its colonies in the New World, the intrepid voyageurs, les coureurs de bois, brought this song over to New France in Quebec. So this song is truly shaped by both France and North America. The Québécois music arranger, Monsieur Bertrand Lamoureux, and he actually arranged the music used in PBI's production of Pride and Prejudice, told me that the lyrics refer to both La Jolie Rochelle, which is the town of La Rochelle in French, and also how the rowing leads one Anneau, which is up country to the provinces of Quebec and Ontario. So here is C'est l'Aviron, it's rowing.
Musique, garde à vous. C'est l'avirant.
The Fayette can also play French military marches. The book of music of the Régiment Saintonge reenacting unit up in the Northeast is an excellent resource for this. We can thank Stephen Southard of the Yorktown Fifes and Drums who shared this book with us. It includes a great arrangement of the French march L'Oiseau Royal, which is the royal bird, which we'll perform for you now. So here is L'Oiseau Royal.
Musique, garde à vous.
We also must certainly learn La Marche du Régiment Bourbonnais. That actually is the march of our own regiment. We're also going to learn some bugle marches, but a lot of French Baroque pieces were written more often for trumpets or natural French horns, not for our B-flat bugles, like our post horns here. But perhaps some of these might be somehow adapted. There's some standard tunes that every fifer and drummer should know. We call these the jam tunes because they're played at mass bands and jam sessions of fifers and drummers, at workshops. The most obvious example is Yankee Doodle.
Musique, garde à vous. Yankee Doodle.
Here's some other jam tunes that we could play. The PVI Corps was actually invited to perform music at the Church Street Stroll in December in Vienna, Virginia, during the Christmas season. So we needed to learn a small repertoire of Christmas music. And the event was so fun that actually, because our Turkish crescent, it sounded just like sleigh bells coming down the street. One great example is the French Christmas song, Patapin. And what's cool, and I love it, it mentions fife and drum. Will you take your little drum with your whistle, Robin, come? When we hear the fife and drum, touraloo, patapatapin. When we hear the fife and drum, Christmas should be frolicsome. So here is Patapin.
Musique, garde à vous. Patapin.
Draw you in the way. There will be many opportunities for the PVI Corps to perform. There are commemorations of historical events, most prominently Yorktown Day in October. There are parades, celebrations on national holidays. There's the big Revolutionary War weekend right over here at Mount Vernon. There are Catholic, French-related, and patriotic events. There are fife and drum musters, like the Fairfax Fife and Drum Muster, as well as the big fife, drum, and bugle learning opportunities, like at the Old Guard Fife and Drum Juniors Workshop at Fort Myer. There's Harmonicon, there's the Field Music School. There'll be many one-off events, many of which can be found on the American 250 calendar, or on the American Friends of Lafayette website, among others. Substantial research, effort, time, and expense has gone into creating this period-accurate European Fife and Drum Corps just in time for this 250th cycle of events and celebrations. But despite the pivotal contribution in the American Revolution made by France and Spain, there's today very scant acknowledgement of this. So, and the PVI Corps, as far as we can determine, it's a unique musical entity in America today. The Corps has been in great demand, especially in this semi-quincentennial year of the America's Declaration of Independence, but the PVI Corps will very much continue to be in high demand at important events. October 2031 is the 250th anniversary of the victory at Yorktown. The Franco-American Alliance won that victory, and it occurred within fairly close driving distance of PVI. Therefore, I sincerely hope that PVI will support and foster the Fife and Drum Corps until at least the 250th of Yorktown 2031, because really nothing similar to what we have created here exists anywhere else. So let me quickly show you a list of my references. And before I end, I just really want to acknowledge all the support that the amazing PVI music has supported the Corps and really made this a reality, this great alliance between so many people. Thank you to Mrs. Siegfried, our Director of Instrumental Music, Mrs. Settle, Ms. Prince, thank you very much. And also I want to say thank you to my wonderful parents who supported me. And thank you very much. We're a great team. Before the end, we have one final song to perform. It's called The World Turned Upside Down. And legend has it that, I know you're thinking of the Hamilton song, this tune was actually played by the British Army when it surrendered at Yorktown in 1781. And it's my hope that the PVI Corps will be able to perform this song in October 2031 for the 250th of Yorktown. Thank you so much again for your attention.
Musique, garde à vous. The world, he is turned upside down.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je vous souhaite une bonne journée.